This is the Tree of Life, Season 2, Chapter 5. In this episode, we will be bringing together the last episode with Season 1, Episode 8 of the Tree of Life, with Season 2, Chapter 2 of 37 Families, to integrate our discussion of non-lineal transmission of territoriality. In Season 1, Chapter 8, we talked about how territoriality could be accumulated within a family unconventionally. In other words, an archetypal consensual, in this example a matrilineal individual, actor begins a non-monogamous relationship with two men. That is, a spatial non-consensual actor, in this example a man, induces arousal in an archetypal consensual, in this example a woman, who has children followed by expectation matching by that archetypal consensual individual. Subsequently, the archetypal consensual parent passes that territoriality onto their children through archetypal assignments consolidated through the family with the other man. The missing piece of the puzzle was the role of sublimation in the process. To start off, when the non-partner spatial non-consensual actor induces arousal in the archetypal consensual partner, the response of the archetypal consensual partner is expectation matching with sublimation imposed upon the spatial non-consensual actor. The extent of the imposition of sublimation upon that actor generates the extent of the territorial accumulation within the archetypal line. That is to say, the relationship between the non-consensual and archetypal actors involves an early period of minimal sublimation, followed by an accelerating integration of sublimation within the verbalizations of the archetypal actor pursuant to the expectations of the non-consensual actor. Finally, the sublimation becomes so prolonged it generates extinction of the reme, or underlying behaviors generating the spatial non-consensuality. This represents a wholesale appropriation of the spatial territoriality of the non-consensual actor relative to the archetypal actor. Now, this is only one side of it. The transmission of that territoriality into an archetypal assignment to offspring requires archetypal convergence between the spatial non-consensual actor and the partner of the archetypal actor. In other words, the transmission of territoriality unconventionally requires creation of parallel converging experience channels between the spatial non-consensual actor and the partner of the archetypal actor. Which is to say, that underlying the appropriation of territoriality, the loss of the spatial non-consensual state, is the transmission of that territory within the archetypal line, preserved by the family unit of which the archetypal lineal line is foundational. The other partner within that line preserving the archetypal consensual state of the archetypal actor. Likewise, the epigenetic profile of the partner is transposed upon the spatial non-consensual actor, as part of this process, eliminating their epigenetic plasticity in the process. If we take the analysis back to the dance floor example given in Season 2, Chapter 1 of 37 Families, what we can see is that it is the degree to which the archetypal actor imposes sublimation upon another actor in meeting their expectations, which determines the generality of the archetypal assignment. That is to say, that territoriality is in play to the extent that there is sublimation within the interactions of the spatial non-consensual and archetypal actors. Thus, it is the act of imposing sublimation upon a suitor which attracts like-minded suitors and produces competitive interactions. In other words, remes become memes through sublimation, becoming archetypal and non-personal, thereby inducing arousal generally as opposed to relationally. Thus, it is in this process of translation that territoriality can be passed and accumulated or consolidated within a lineal archetypal line. Thus, just as the linking of states of arousal is necessary for the sublimation, which produces appropriation of territoriality by an archetypal actor, so too must that arousal be preceded by an archetypal convergence between parallel actors. In other words, the transmission of territoriality and its accumulation is a cycle. It begins with convergence between parallel lines in relation to a single object, that is the archetypal consensual actor, caused by archetypal transformation of one's territoriality, becoming general as opposed to personal. And it ends with archetypal transformation of the second individual's territoriality lineally. What this means is that the induction of sublimation into a relationship pursuant to appropriation to a lineal archetypal line generates attraction of new partners, with the process repeating with the new partners, and consolidated by the originating family unit. That's the end of the podcast for today.